I'm going to take you back to college for a moment. I remember saying with full confidence, I'm going to have a kid before I get married. Now, let me tell you, at the time, marriage was not on my radar, but becoming a mom, that was something I knew I wanted. No question about it. Marriage, though, I was skeptical, even afraid of it. Looking back, I realize now that I wasn't just afraid of marriage itself, I was terrified of failing at it. You see, I hadn't really seen any long-lasting, healthy marriages around me. And one thing I knew for sure was that if I ever did get married, there was no way I was going to go through a divorce. So I needed to be 100% sure that marriage was right. And honestly, I never felt that certainty. Fast forward, after 10 years together and one child later, my husband and I finally got married. We could list 100 reasons why we waited as long as we did. Life was busy, we had a kid, we were growing together, figuring things out. But at the core of it, the truth was simple. I wasn't ready. But here's the thing. Over time, I realized he was my person. He was my best friend, the one I couldn't imagine my life without. And as we spent more years together building our life, I just knew he was the one that I was meant to spend forever with. Even after 10 years of being together and growing up alongside each other, when we said I do, there was a shift. I felt this deep sense of certainty that I had never had before. Something clicked, and I just knew we weren't going to fail. He was my forever. Welcome to Unlearn the World Through the Looking Glass, where we explore the moments, learnings, and experiences that changed how we saw the world forever. I'm Shannon, and I'm joined by Richard and Beki. In this episode, we'll be sharing our personal experiences with marriage and reflecting on how it has shaped our lives in meaningful ways. Relationships are complex, and marriage, often seen as a lifelong commitment, requires intentional effort, love, and communication. Let's get started. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Let me start off by asking for you guys, what was your introduction to marriage? Is it different than mine?
Actually, I can't say that it was hugely different. The marriages that I witnessed, right, at least that I recall kind of knowing, if the two people were together, it was often a little bit rocky, at least when I saw a little bit from the inside of it. And there was divorce around. Like I was a child and teenager in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost like divorce was in fashion at the time. And so that was something that was happening quite a bit around me. My parents got divorced after I graduated from high school. It was halfway through my first year at university. I can't say it was the wrong choice for either one of them, right? So I thought it was actually the right thing for them to do. But from a marriage perspective, it wasn't something that I was running off to do. I will say since then, I'm pleased to say I have seen a couple of marriages that have done really quite well. And I would say mine has actually been pretty good. Yay, I chose well. He did too. And so that matching, I think, made a really big difference. So like you said, when you know it's your person, you're willing to do the work that it takes to keep it going.
Yeah.
I remember as a teenager and even going to college, and I talk about my parents and people be like, wow, your parents are still married? Because it's at a certain time, kind of like you said, Beki, there was a time where everybody was divorced. So all of my friends were coming from single family, like single parent households. So having that unit together was kind of like weird for them, right? For me, I always aspired to marriage. And I think, not to name anybody in particular, I think the marriages that I've seen, even the ones that were seemingly good, always had that friction in the back end. So when you get to know those people, you really understand that, wow, like marriage, no matter how good it is, you never know what's going on in somebody's life and somebody's marriage. But it was always something that I aspired to, knowing that it would be hard work, but I just knew I had to find that right person.
Yeah.
I think it was a few times where I felt like I had found that person. And I think I found the one so many freaking times. And the time I actually did find the one, when I took a step back on dating. In college, meeting people was different because like you have classes with people, it's easy to meet people, and you're meeting new people all the time. Post college, and in the 20s, or the 2000s, the further you get closer to now, dating completely had changed by the time I got back to dating. And I was like, man, how do you meet people? because I've never necessarily been that person who just went up to somebody like, hey, how you doing?
What's your sign?
Right.
I will say I've never heard that. But.
So, like learning how to date when I got back into the dating pool was like, it took a lot to really get back into it. And I took a lot of angst with the dating apps. But I met my wife on a dating app, so I'm thankful for it there. But I really didn't find my wife until I was really intentional about what I was looking for, what was acceptable, what I wanted my marriage to look like. So once I really nailed down what I was looking for, what I wanted my relationship to look like, and the deal breakers that I had and the negotiables that I had, and really figured out who I wanted to be in a marriage, it allowed me to bypass a lot of women probably that I would have considered in the past, and I probably would have took a long time to date. Once I drilled it down, I was able to date with more purpose. And people talk about purposeful dating all the time, and I thought that I was dating with a purpose, but right before I met my wife, I really didn't understand what purposeful dating was. So I was looking for my wife. So it was certain things that if you're dating somebody and you're not looking for a wife, you can overlook it. But when you're looking for your wife, those things you really can't overlook. You have to either figure it out, come to a compromise, or move on.
Yeah, it's funny. I can't say that I was specifically looking for a husband. I might have missed him if I had been, just simply because our meet cute was random, and I couldn't have predicted it, right? Like his sister came up and talked to me in a bar and brought me back to the group, right? And so that's how I met my husband. And it's one of those moments where we were living long distance at the time. I had completely given up on dating. I just didn't even want to bother. And all of a sudden I meet this guy and I'm like, oh, hey, maybe he's worth traveling for. And so it was probably a good thing in many respects that we were as far apart as we were for that first year. I think it really gave us some really strong foundations for communication. That without that, I hope it would have still worked. Like, I don't really think that we would have failed, but it's just one of those things where we had to be so planned and so intentional about how we spent our time. And I mean, it was back at a point where we were also still paying for the minutes on cell phones. And so we also had to economize that way. Otherwise, we were spending ridiculous amounts of money to stay connected.
I think, Beki, like we have the same story, like very similar. So the weird thing is I gave up. Like I was like, I am going to be single. I mean, stereotypically, I'm going to be a cat lady, dog lady, like over it. And so I literally made that proclamation. I'm like, it's fine. I'll just be the single friend. When I made that proclamation, I was 22. I had just graduated, but I never... Before then, now being married, I can say I don't think I really was in a relationship. I might have been, but they weren't purposeful. So maybe you get this way when you're after you're married. But at this point, it was just entertaining individuals. I met my husband in a club. He will tell you I was rude. I was very honest and direct. He said, hey, I'm going to give you my number. And I said, no, thank you, because I'm not going to call you. Like I was at that level. I was very like, I'm not, wow. I know, guys. Mind you, he was not in my state. Like I was visiting a friend and we were not in the same state. So I was like, why? I'm not going to call you. Like I'm going back home. Talk to you later. Fine. And so he was like, I'll take your number. And he waited a week or so to call me. And based off of my previous experiences, I was like, you don't even remember who I am. I never forget. I was like, if you remember me, tell me exactly what I was wearing. Because most men wouldn't remember something like that. To my shoes, he detailed my outfit. So I was like, he's not going to answer this question. But to the T, like to this day, he can still tell you what I was wearing. And that started a beautiful budding relationship of long distance. And we were long distance for 4 years. I mean, we broke up a couple times, but it's fine. Because, with that distance for that long a period of time, you're like, is this going to work? I had my issues with commitment and marriage anyway. So after 4.5 years, he moved. And then kind of the rest was history. But I can tell you that I don't think I was ever dating with a purpose. It kind of just fell in my lap, you know, and then he stuck.
Well, and it's funny as you say that too, because for me, I honestly had meaningful relationships, people that I could have at least started a marriage with. I'm not sure how they would have gone. There were a couple that I think would have epically failed. There were a couple of the relationships that I had. I was a serial monogamist. And so I kept on getting into these relationships for long periods of time. And right before I gave up was when, very much like Richard was talking about, I'd be like with someone, we'd hang out for maybe 4 weeks. And then I'd be like, yeah, you're not my future. So you're not my present either. I didn't quite say it that harshly, but it was pretty much that message of, yeah, I think this has just been fun. So off you go. And so when I finally did meet my husband, my friends were like, okay, but is this a 4-week guy? Because you seem to be really not.
I think we sound brutal. I think we sound brutal right now about we
Well, in fairness, some of the guys were the same, right? Yes. So, you know, it was just sort of where I was in my life. And I wasn't hateful about it. I was just like
honest.
And, you know, this isn't really something that's working for me. Other men had broken up with me after 2 to 3 weeks of going out too. So, right. Like at the time, I wasn't thinking about it as boy, bye. I was just more along the lines of, you know, just like, this is where I'm going. My career was starting at that time. I had other things to focus on, and dealing with drama in a relationship wasn't it. And I had already broken off one engagement, and I wasn't looking at doing a second one.
I think prior relationships, I showed up as a representative. And so because of the length of time that me and my husband were together, and then, you know, I still kind of was a representative before he moved here because we weren't around each other, you know, a lot. So it was kind of like, if I had a bad day, like I could hide that for a very long period of time. But when someone is in close proximity to you and you are challenged in that way, I think that opens you up. I think with him, he was the first one that like saw me like raw and uncut in so many ways. And that scared me in the beginning because I'm like, he's going to leave me. Like I'm going to do something to ruin this relationship. So I was just waiting for that to happen for a very long time. And then we grew, we evolved. But I think that was my number one fear of marriage, is like the way that certain people, because I don't even want to say generations, in my experiences, was that marriage was not for life. And I always looked at marriage for life. It was like, if he does this, it's done. Or, you know what I mean? If you do this, it's done. So there was no like concrete, hey, this is a covenant. Hey, this is supposed to be for life. And so I was always waiting for the moment for somebody to leave. And that was my like probably number one struggle with even wanting to get married. Cause I'm like, well, they gonna leave anyway. So might as well be fine by myself. You know?
I think it's important as we look for the people, that we later on ended up marrying, to go through those 4-week relationships and the ups and the downs, because those are the things that shapes us, and those are the things who shows us who we are. Think about that first relationship that you had and the person that you were in that relationship. It's like, for me, I can speak for myself. Like, it's no way that I would have wanted to be that person in my marriage. So it's so much that we learn from those 4-week relationships. And you don't always have to date for a purpose, especially like when you're younger. I feel like it's fun to go out, hey, see what you like, see what you don't like. This is fit for you. This doesn't fit. This doesn't work. I need to work on this. Like for me, by the time I really got purposeful was because I was getting real close to 40 and I didn't have any kids and I wanted kids, and I wasn't about to date. I wasn't about to be 40 dating somebody that's 21. So that was definitely not about to happen. So for me, I was like, all right, I got a set amount of time. So I can't spend time dating someone who's incredible for a year, but that's not my wife.
Yeah.
You know, because I might miss my wife dating someone incredible for a year. If I'm not dating with a purpose, I might have known that it wasn't going to work. And in my 20s, that might have been fine. We could grow together because you're still trying to figure out who you are. In my 30s, and as I inch closer to 40, it just wasn't an option anymore for me.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is, there are a couple of people, one person that comes to mind very much who is close to me, and they got married. I don't even know if they were 21, and they're still together now. Right. And it's like somewhere between 35 and 40 years that they've been married. So They grew up together. They met as teenagers and they grew up together. To me, my hat's off to that kind of couple, because who I was at 15, 16, 18, even 25 was very different than who I am today. And I wouldn't want anyone to have to be married to me at 22, right? Like, I wasn't my best self at that point in time. And one of the things that my husband and I talked about when we first started dating, I mean, it might have been month one, where it was like, these are a couple of the rules of engagement in this relationship, and this is how we function. One of the big ones of that was, there is you, there is me, and there is us. No one gives up who they are in order to become an us. We need to be able to cultivate ourselves individually so that we are, like, I don't want to be half a marriage. I am that, but I also am fully Beki.
That's a fair point, because I think that a lot of preconceived notions that I had about marriage when I was younger was that you become this different entity.
Yeah.
And you're no longer yourself. And I've seen so many people get frustrated in being the we, or being so-and-so's mom or so-and-so's dad, where their identity gets lost. So I think that that's something important. Like, I think my wife is really a strong advocate of making sure that she still is her and that I'm still me, and that we have time for ourselves and time together. It's just one of those things I think people miss in the beginning.
I always said that I was going to have kids first. The funny thing is, my husband is very like old school. And I remember we found out I was pregnant. I begged him. I was like, please do not propose to me. I don't want you to marry me because I'm having your kid. Because again, from history and kind of just seeing marriages around me, that's not enough to hold a marriage. And we need to be for sure, for sure, for sure. That was my big thing. So I'm like, we're going to be parents. I don't regret that decision, but the length of time that it took to adjust to being parents, right? Because that is also a shift in the makeup of a relationship where it was just 2 and now it's 3. And so we definitely had some adjustment phases post baby, but I'm grateful for that, because I think once we got married, I wouldn't advise people to go in that order. But again, when it happens, I think it gives such a solid foundation. Because if you push through that, because again, usually like the first 2 years of having a baby is a huge adjustment for any couple, because now you have to prioritize your time differently. Me as a mom, I changed. I went through postpartum. And so I was all over the place emotionally. And so I'm kind of grateful we weren't married, just to be quite honest. But it also made me easier to be like, I don't want to do this anymore. We're broken up. Once we said I do, it became very much we, but in the same sense, I didn't lose myself. Like, I was very much, we had worked through all that stuff. And in our premarital counseling, question he posed in premarital, because I love it, and it actually shifted my perspective and kind of put me at ease in regards to talking about marriage for myself personally. He said, what is one thing that he can do to make you leave this marriage? And he asked us both this question. And I was like, lie. But then in my mind, I didn't say it out loud. I said lie, but I'm like, first of all, we both lied to each other. Like, it's been 8 years. So like, I hate liars, but it's not going to make me leave my marriage. And so my husband said it first. He was like, nothing. And then I was like, nothing. And he was like, so you're the first couple that actually answered that question right.
Yeah, because as soon as you start thinking about when you'll leave, is when you start migrating toward leaving.
He said you should never go into a marriage coming up with an exit plan. Like, things may happen, but if you're going into the marriage with all these this checklist of things that you won't tolerate, like, why are you getting married? And I didn't think about it like that. I was like, all right. So that kind of like pushed down some things, because I'm sure there's stuff that some people are like, this is actual deal breaker. But if you think that person would do something like that, then why are you marrying them? I appreciate the length of time we waited and the obstacles and the challenges we had, because I don't think our marriage and us individually would have been what we are now had we gotten married prior to me having a baby. And we didn't, like, we were in our 20s, like that decade that I'm talking about, 21 and 22. So, you know, I think that those years were instrumental in where we are now in our marriage.
Yeah. And I think about that. And I think that we talked through so many of the different things about what kind of marriage we wanted to have. And there are so many things that have not been what we planned, right? Like, we've been married now for over 20 years, and there's a lot of change that happens over that amount of time. And I do laugh because at one point I did a 6-month secondment, right? So I worked for my company, but in a different place, covering for someone else. I was in Argentina for 6 months. One of the conversations that he and I had before I left, or even before I made the final decision to go, was, we'll be long distance, because he wasn't going to quit his job for 6 months. And we were like, oh yeah, no big thing. It'll be fine. We know how to be long distance. It'll be great. And we did, which was good, because otherwise I would have been a bigger hot mess. It turns out, after being married for 10 years, you really get used to the other person. And that was a lot of really great time for me. But I came back with such a level of appreciation. Like, we would get onto Zoom calls and he would hold up the cat and say, hey, the cat wants to say hi, you know, I mean, it was just sort of all of those kinds of things that he was thoughtful enough about, helped organize getting my family on a Zoom, because they weren't corporate. So they, so we had to kind of help them kind of know what they needed to do with that. So I was even able to see my dad while I was down there, and he had turned on a computer one time and said, I'm not doing that again. So stuff like that, what we learned how to do really was problem solve when we were living at a distance. And so that's what we were able to kind of renew. But it's so funny, all of those ideas of what you thought marriage would be. And everyone always said, oh, it's a lot of work. And I thought, well, what does that even mean? Turns out it's a lot of work.
Yes.
You are problem solving all of the time to try to figure out how everything fits together and how you see each other every day.
Yeah.
A lot of times you see the storybook movies and whatnot, and you think that you fall in love that one time, and that one time you fall in love sustains you for the whole entire rest of your lives, and you live happily ever after. And that is just not the case.
Not at all.
The thing about being in love is that you have to choose love every single time.
Yeah.
Even when you don't feel like choosing love, you got to choose love. And if you remember that and you don't try to hold on to that first time you fell in love, it's a lot easier to understand, because you still have the same goal. That's your partner. You're working on the same team. You got to choose it over and over again.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I carried into marriage that's funny, because I'm like, I go to bed mad all the time. It's like, never go to bed angry, and my husband laughs at me because I'm like, I'll go to bed mad all the time. And I'm like, you should sleep on the couch. Stereotypical, like, sitcom, like, go sleep on the couch. He's like, I am sleeping right here. Do you want to talk about it? But also being in love with somebody that literally argues differently than me and is very quiet. Okay. And I am, I'm on a podcast, very outspoken. So I want to unload and word vomit everything I have to say. I will verbally assault my husband all the time. No shade, but like, I will let it all out. And then I'm waiting for a response, and he's just like dead air. So you know?
Seriously, is your husband the same as mine?
That's what I'm saying.
Because mine just kind of stares at me and says, that's a
Right.
lot.
And that's why I was like very happy for the length of time, because it took a while, because when I was younger, I'm like, I wanted to break up every day. I'm like, can we resolve this? I hate gray. And so if we don't resolve what my issue is, what are we doing? And so it took getting married. And like I said, there was a shift in like the permanency of like, hey, I do. That means like, if you really value your vows, like, and understand what you're saying in those vows, like for better or worse, like all those things that you're saying, I can't break up with you or walk out the door because you're being mute when we're arguing. So going to bed angry? Yes, I have. I try not to now in my evolved marriage. Like, but every day's not going to be, sunshine and rainbows. And I think I went in prepared to know that. But there's like the stereotypes is like, you should never go to bed angry. Well, how realistic is that? I go to bed annoyed, not with my husband, but sometimes because my house is dirty and I don't have time to clean it. And I'm just taking it out on him, So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a key thing, right? What is it exactly that you're angry about? And my husband isn't necessarily that he doesn't have a point of view.
Right.
It's actually one of those moments where he's just really kind of deciding, it seems, whether or not it's worth saying, because he's really choosy about what he's going to engage with. And, he also answers the question specifically as asked. So I have learned to become a little bit more specific about what I really want. The funny thing, and this is true, I swear to you, this is absolutely true. I have witnesses from our wedding, including my husband, who will never let this go down.
Oh, man.
We're up, we're doing our vows, and there's that whole piece of, to speak and to listen. Yeah. So I say to speak, and I trip verbally, and I go, and to listen. And the whole place starts laughing because clearly I speak just fine. It's that listening bit that I hadn't quite developed yet. And I'd like to say that I have improved in that area, but every once in a while, something will come up and my husband will just say, to speak and to listen. Thankfully, not during arguments because, we don't actually argue, though. We negotiate. That's always been because there are no raised voices. Mm-hmm. Raised voices aren't allowed. That's another one of those things that we've kind of come to. There's no raised voices. And I'm not saying, look, other people can negotiate, fight, do whatever they want to do for their marriage. But we made a decision that there's no name calling ever. Yeah. And there is always, like, if your voice is going up, then we need to take a pause because there's nothing good that tends to happen when I start ranting.
Yeah. I might take that back, but I feel like my voice is always elevated. So we're going to.
Oh, no, it's all about raised from the norm, which gives me a lot of latitude.
I mean, when I think about talking about going to bed angry, I think more important for me is just having a short memory and forgiving quick. Because it's like, I need grace too. I need forgiveness too.
Is that a man thing?
So it's stuff that happens. I don't know. I mean, it's just really, because it's like really, when you compare things, I talked about life, right? When we talk about life and all of that stuff, when you compare things on a grand scale, if it's something, is this really worth being mad about? And if it's not, just let it go. Why are you going to be mad for 5 hours and
you're
upset?
Speaking
5 hours.
Right. And you're speaking for all the husbands because that's something my husband would say. Like,
hey, I mean, you got to let it go. I think when we talk about like misconceptions about marriage, one thing that I truly did not get, and I was like, that sounds stupid. Like, why is that a thing? Like, legitimately, everybody always used to talk about marriage as a business. And the reason it sounded stupid to me is because I didn't quite understand what they were saying. Marriage is a legal entity.
Yes.
And there's different rights that you have as married people when it comes to one another. Now, I completely understand. I was like, oh, marriage is a business. I think the biggest example of that was going to the hospital with my wife as a boyfriend and going to the hospital with my wife as a husband. completely different treatment because I'm allowed to know a lot more. The doctors can speak and tell me different things that they wouldn't be able to tell me if I was just a boyfriend. So it is a business in a sense. And I thought that it was more like that sounded so loveless to me, but it's just people literally saying that it's a legal contract essentially that binds you and this person together, and it's rights that you two have when it comes to one another based off of being married. And I was like, oh, totally get it. Marriage is business.
Yeah. What comes to my mind as you say that I've never actually thought about before is that there's that extra permission for you to care for your spouse when they're in those situations. Yeah. We had a trip to the hospital at one point in time, and I was that wife and saying, we need more pain meds over here, right? Like I just turned into project manager for care for one person because I did actually recognize that in that hospital, there were all of these other people who needed the attention of the staff and of the team. And they were great. When I would come out and say, hi, I need more meds, they'd be like, they knew, well, number one, it wasn't for me. And they also knew that I was just giving a heads up. I wasn't out there saying, I can't believe that you aren't here, blah, 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 blah. In fact, one time when we'd gone to the hospital, I had actually said to them, do you need the wife to throw a fit? Because like I could play that person. I'm not that person. I'm not angry. But if you need to use me in that way to get other people to do what you need to do, yeah, like I can go ballistic, just, and then we'll just like laugh about it after. And I wanted to do that because my husband isn't one who's going to pound his fist on the table in order to get that attention. Yeah. And he needed that attention. And I wanted for him to be able to have that. Now, weirdly, he would totally pound his fist on the table to get attention to me.
Yeah.
Just not for him.
Yeah. It's the whole, like, it's a legal document when you get married, right? But like the fairy tale wedding, it's like we kissed the bride and you're married. No, I didn't know. Like I had to mail stuff in like to the town, and like I was like, what is happening? Just that process, but it is illegal. But because me and my husband had my son prior to, it was totally different. One, I got an epidural, and that was the most excruciating thing for me. But I think I got pricked like 7 times. So you're delirious. My son came at like midnight. Everyone's talking to me afterwards, right? Part of the documentation that they are required to give is paternity that says, because if I put him on the birth certificate, he has to confirm via a separate document, because we were not married, that he was taking on the paternal rights that I assigned to him in the birth certificate. So there was another affidavit that was required to be signed with another person in the room, because what am I going to do? I'm delirious, but whatever. To make sure that he understood that he was the daddy. It was quite an experience for me, but
sounds like a blast.
It was great. I mean, other than that, it was a beautiful experience, minus those 2, but just the polar opposites when you are married versus not. Again, wouldn't take it back, but it was just interesting to see the dynamics of where marriage is placed in certain things like that, for medical emergencies, the legalities of the paperwork and all that stuff. But once you get past all of that, the marriage, it's great in all of its stages. But I have a question, and this is more so for Richard, because I just want to know, right? Because a lot of men, especially older men, since I was growing up, it's like happy wife, happy. No, I did not. I'm just saying. In general, like when I was younger, like you heard this sentiment all the time. I mean, and I'm just interested in your thought. Is happy wife, happy life? Do you agree with that?
Not necessarily.
Agree.
Because I think if I'm just focusing on my wife being happy and not myself being happy as well, or us being happy as a unit, then I think you've missed 2/3 of the plot.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand the sentiment. Like, yes, if your wife is happy, things are a lot easier. But if I'm happy, things are a lot easier too. So, I think it's kind of like an old school way of thinking where we push ourselves to the back, and it's like we elevate our wife. And I think definitely I agree with elevating your wife too. But you should also make sure that you're taken care of, because my wife would not let me be miserable and she's happy, because she's not gonna be able to be happy. And so it's when we're happy together, life is happy.
Yeah,
I mean, even when life is sad.
Yes.
Even when life is sad, knowing I have my wife with me, it's still happy in a sense. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
so,
there's a levity that comes when if it's only one person who is deeply sad, right, about a situation, it's nice to know that you have that support from your spouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just,
the low and high.
Yeah.
Like, I love to come home and celebrate things with my husband, but there have been many times that I've walked in the door and he comes up going, okay, so what's going on? Right. And so I think that that's always so important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. I'm really happy to hear that you say that.
I think it's a nice sentiment. I think it's a nice thought, but I think it's one of those things that it sounds good on paper, but in actuality, it's probably not the best way to treat things.
I look at it like, when you're younger and your parents will talk to you about the fairy tales and like they fluff it up. But that's kind of what I put that statement as, right? Where it's like happy wife, happy life. Like, first of all, it's not that simple. Second of all, like, I'll use the example of me. I had postpartum. Like, that is an emotional toll that he couldn't make me happy, even if he tried his hardest, right? And so if that's the sentiment that you're teaching, I feel like you're not really fully explaining the complexities of marriage. And also you're not fully explaining the complexities of what it is to be a human being and having a range of emotions from day to day. And it's not my spouse's job to carry the weight of my emotions. Now, he could be a support system for that, but he's not the thing that fuels my happiness. He can be one of those things that, hey, like, I'm really happy to see you. I'm really happy to be around you because obviously I married you. But it's my responsibility to do and seek things that make me happy and vice versa. And so that was one of the biggest lessons and also it's like, I'm always right. You have to do what I say. And it's like, while I would love that, it's not.
But would you really love that?
No. I mean, sometimes I like to be right, but but no, not all the time. I love the balance of it. And I think I don't remember her name, so sorry. But there was like a clip of her and it went viral on social media. And she was saying that her and her husband go by percentages, right? Of like for emotions. Like, have you guys seen that?
I think it might be, is it Brene Brown that said this?
Yes. And she was saying like some days I have 10. And so they'll basically do like check in with each other and say, hey, how are you feeling today? Where you are? Like, are you stressed? What are you going to able to give me? And sometimes it's 10. And she was like, well, he'll do 90. He can commit to 90. He's like, some days we're both depleted and we don't really have much to give. And so then we just take space. We do the things that we need to do to fill up so that we can fill each other up. So I loved that because that was like, that's reality for me. Happiness is one emotion. There is several other things that I go through on a regular daily basis that he cannot fulfill for me. So where do you put that? But I love the fact that he's a partner with me. So if I'm sad, he might give me a back rub. He might talk me through it. He might ease my nerves. If my anxiety's high or whatever the case may be. I think there needs to be more of an honest conversation that's not just simplified by happily ever after, because that's not the only thing attached to marriage. That's not the only thing attached to life.
Well, and it makes me think of too, like there's normal and healthy conflict, right? So it's not even so much about being in a fight or being in an argument or who's sleeping where and things like that. It really comes down to sometimes we disagree.
Yeah.
And sometimes we come to the same point of agreement, but we come there from different paths. And so it's actually okay to just say, this is what I want. Are you okay with that? Yep. And not excavating why.
Right.
And just being happy that you agree on that thing. But there are those moments where you have to do a little bit of that internal struggle to figure out how, and it's not, I give up, you give up. Right? It's like that 90-10 that you were just talking about, where it's, I need help solving this. So I need your assistance in helping me process through whatever this thing might be. And I know at one point, there were areas where my husband and I had views on, you don't say anything about family or you don't, stuff like that. And finally, we had this conversation of, Right. So you've been around enough. You're family now. And they belong to you as much as they belong to me. Right.
Yeah.
And that, I mean,
Yes.
right. And I mean, I'm grateful that we both have fabulous in-laws. So that helps. But it just becomes, when I'm having a conversation about something that might have frustrated me, I can't be sitting there editing it based on these false rules about what I can touch and what I can't.
Yeah.
That makes me think about the compliment that my mom gave. And it's probably like the best compliment that, especially the relationships that I had been in prior. My mom said, "You're yourself around her."
Mm-hmm.
And my wife would say that she felt free to be her full self around me.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important because you talk about having your representatives. It's so important to be with someone that you don't have to wear a mask and just to be able to be yourself, because you can only keep up with appearance for so long.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to be my full self with my wife is such a relief. That's one less weight that I can take off. I don't have to be somebody fake. Let me put this weight on the ground. I'm good. My wife loves me for who I am, and vice versa. Like, I love her for exactly who she is. And I think that is one of the things that's taking a lot of stress out of the dating and the being and the getting married and everything that happens. I know I don't have to ask. It's like, are you being for real?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't have to hide how I'm feeling. I can just be real with her.
Yeah.
So
Before I got married, my mom, she said, keep other people out of your marriage. And I took that not as literally as I thought. So but I learned it in our engagement era before we got married, because as soon as you involve, whether that be family or friends, inside the marriage or the relationship, one, you're not honoring the person that you're with, right? Because if there's a disagreement that I'm going to get over, I can't guarantee, cousin whatever or auntie whatever is going to get over that. So to keep those things private, and I will never forget, she was like, a lot of people would still be married if they had kept people out of their relationship. So that was the advice she gave me. And that has worked fully. But I'll tell you the moment that I knew, well, 2 moments that I knew that husband was the one, he described me in a way that, like, I knew that I was like, okay, he gets me. He's like, you're like an egg. And I was like, what?
I want to hear this explanation.
Yeah. You have my attention.
Like, you're like an egg. And I was like, what? Love my husband, but he's a little corny. So I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, you have this hard shell. And he's like, but as soon as you crack it, he's like, you are just liquid. He's like, so he was able to see past, like, the demeanor, because I am like the strong friend, like all that stuff. So a lot of people don't get to see all of that with me. And so he's seen me at my lows, my highs, like my quirkiness, the things that I don't expose to everybody. So to be with someone that knew me fully, and that was early. We were dating. We weren't even engaged at that point in time. I was like, oh, he could be the one, but I was still running from marriage in this era.
When my husband came back with me for the first time to meet I think it was the first time to meet my family, my grandmother was actually in the hospital. So that's how she met him. And, she kind of gave the thumbs up and all this kind of stuff. And so later on, I've had access to her journal or her diary. And inside there, she was like, oh, I think this one's going to stick. And the first time she met him. And I think that's what she saw too, was that I was me. And I was really just comfortable with myself. And I think, for people when they're wondering, should I marry? Is this the right person? I think that's really one of the key questions to ask, right? Is what is it that I feel I can't do when I'm with this person?
Yeah.
I think that's a powerful question.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that was the deciding factor. One, obviously the marital counseling of like, hey, there is no in my mind of how he would end, but also knowing that at that point in time, there wasn't any part of me that he had not been exposed to. So ups, downs, highs, lows, family drama, friend drama, like he had been with me throughout and was like the yin to my yang. So like, when I talk, I also this is just my own personal opinion. I feel like your spouse should be your best friend. Because really and truly, they are the ones that are around you 24/7. They are the ones that are around you and know everything. So if you tell me something and you're my friend, most likely my husband knows because he's my best friend. But I feel like I don't hide. And I feel like if you have to hide any part of you, teach his own. But I don't feel like that person is that one for you, because you shouldn't be hiding any part of yourself with the person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with.
Or you have to be willing to hide it forever.
Yeah. For me, just starting off the beginning of my relationship, fearful of marriage, more so fearful of failure, and going into it also with preconceived notions of what a man and woman should do just based off of how I was raised and based off of input. So, certain gender roles and things of that nature. But I have always been a very self-sufficient young lady. So I don't need my husband to take out the trash. While it's great, I didn't think that should be on my list of things required from a husband. I am more than capable of mowing the lawn and shoveling and maintaining finances. And so all those are attributes that I think are, if you have them, great, right? It doesn't mean that my husband's less of a man because I'm capable of doing those things. And so I had to go into marriage really understanding that I didn't have to become subdued or submissive, right, to my husband and act in lowering what I brought to the table and my value. Now, I love when he takes out the trash and snow blows and all that, but I can do it. Right? So I think that was my biggest kind of shift when we got married. And like I said at the top of the episode, for me, faith is very big in my marriage. So when we said I do, it was a covenant between me, my husband, and God. And so when we came into that agreement, there were certain things that did shift. I felt like it kind of was like singed to us, where I'm not leaving, you're not leaving, for better or worse, for sickness and health, we're going to be together. And so I think growing up, I never looked at marriage like that. And I've been in church my whole life, but I never looked at marriage as like, hey, this is an agreement between me, myself, my husband, and God. And so that was the shift, I think, once we said I do. And I can appreciate how even on my worst days and the fear of being left, he's never left. And I have learned to apologize. That is number one. If you are afraid or too prideful to say, I'm sorry, then you're going to struggle a lot in marriage. And so that was the most humbling thing for me, was to be able to apologize for hurting, for putting him in a position he shouldn't have been in, or whatever the case may be, right? I had to do that. And that was probably the biggest shift from girlfriend, boyfriend, fiance to husband and wife, is humbling myself enough to say I'm right, or you're right. I'm sorry. My intention wasn't this. And to really take my pride out of situations and be able to flourish in our relationship. And so when those moments come, to me, they're the most beautiful. And we're going to be the most, I don't know, unperfect, because there's no perfect couple. There's no perfect marriage, but we're the most imperfect, perfect couple I know in my mind.
Right. Which is a beautiful place for that to happen.
Yeah.
Really.
Yes.
Yeah. I just recognized from all of the other relationships that I'd been in how much baggage I had still carried in. Like, I'd set a lot of that stuff down, but I had, and they were issues with me. There was nothing with my husband about what he was doing, how he handled anything that was upsetting or difficult for me. It was all my kind of what I was bringing to the table. Things about money and being financially secure, because I hadn't always been financially secure. And that whole idea of blending money, it took me a long time to be willing to do that, because I just kept on worrying that, well, what happens? Right. And you keep going is what happens. And so there were all of those moments for me where my need to be in control of things needed to be shaken out of me. a little bit. And I needed to do the shaking on that so that I could relinquish some of that control and relax into the fact that someone not only could take care of me, but actually wanted to.
Mm.
He's a very caring man. I love him to pieces, and he loves me back. Finding those ways to bring kindness to each other all the time became really important. I mean, one of the traditions that we have in our marriage, or had for a long time, I guess we still do it, is every year we commit to another year in our marriage and our anniversary. And a lot of that comes from that commitment that I need to hear that you'll still be here a year from now. I need to hear that. I don't need to hear it anymore. It's kind of become a little bit of a sassy kind of thing with us at this point in time, which is now it's fun, right? That's the other thing that I didn't realize and didn't understand could be so powerful in a strong marriage was, boy, you need to learn how to laugh because the world around you is serious a lot of the time. And, you know, a little bit of humor goes a long way with letting you let go of all the things that are hard to carry.
Yeah.
Shannon, you talked about the world looking different after you said I do. And for me, when I said I do and we put the rings on our finger, I expected something magical to happen and like for my body to start buzzing. Or I don't know what I was expecting, but I thought something like crazy was going to happen, but it really didn't. And for me, that moment really didn't happen until my realization that no matter what's going on in the world, the good, the bad, we talked about politics, like everything that's going on now, no matter what's going on, the world will forever look different for me because I know that I have a partner to go through the good times and the bad times with. When you when you have that person that can be there with you, it gives you a completely different outlook on the world. For me, my wife is motivation. My child that's coming is extra motivation. And it's ways that I couldn't be motivated otherwise.
I think that there's a whole piece of the tingles grew for me, right? Because it was one of those things that, like you say, you know, you walk down the aisle, there's all this excitement. Everybody's there to applaud. Everything happens. And that's the wedding, right? Like everybody's cheering the wedding. No one's cheering the marriage because, Shannon, to your point, they shouldn't be invited to that.
Yes.
And I think that there's a whole piece where my motivation is really about let's keep us united. Let's keep us in that package. Mm-hmm. Our roles and responsibilities have shifted so much over the course of our marriage that, you know, trash out, all cooking, grocery shopping, all that stuff. There's probably more of a settling in on that now, but we didn't make those decisions day one and, you know, create the project plan. And it stuck from there. It all just shifted over time. And I think it has to. I mean, we don't have the kids' introduction piece that caused a lot of that shifting, but we did have other moments in our lives that did prompt us to go, okay, so that's not going to work now. And now we have to shift. And I think it's important to be able to stay fluid that way.
And if I'll leave it with this. So I don't think I felt like tingles, right? When we said I do, I just think based off of my history and fear of marriage, when I said I do, I really truly meant that. And I felt the weight and the permanency of my words. Yes. And so when those rings exchanged, like I knew the commitment that I felt. So I don't want to say it was magical rainbows and, you know, like butterflies and fireworks, but it was something in me that was like, okay, this is my partner forever. And I remember I've had a couple single friends who are like, what's the point of getting married these days? You could just, you know, whatever. I am a proponent of getting married. I think it is the most beautiful experience aside from the motherhood aspect, but the most beautiful thing to live life with somebody unfiltered, uninhibited, that someone just knows the raw self. Because if you are sitting in a world where you're by yourself and having to navigate this world, especially where we are today, I don't know how you're doing it. And having a partner that's committed to you, choosing you every day, growing with you, evolving with you, loving you unconditionally, and committed to the vows that you took on the day you said I do, I don't know if I would do it any other way. Like, I love being married to I love my husband, so he got his plug. I love him till the end of time. And so there's, and then you can't explain it. Someone's like, I've been with somebody for 20 years. If that's your preference, fine. But you can't explain that feeling, I don't feel like, to anybody else that's not in a marriage. Do you know what I mean? So experience it. It's great when you're with the right person and for the right reasons.
That's the caveat.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Remember, the world looks different through every lens. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. What's a moment in your life that changed how you see the world? Use the link in the show notes to share your story with us. Your voice helps us grow, and your stories keep the conversation going. I'm Shannon on behalf of myself, Richard, and Beki. Thanks for listening. Until next time.